Dude, I sometimes fish in a full ghillie suit.
Guys, like, we know about this permit fishery, and we want to go there, and da-da-da, and I go, and he talked about it like 3 times. I lean over to Chad, I'm like, why doesn't he just buy the frickin' permit and go fishing? It's surprisingly powerful, the culture against keeping the fish.
Oh, I use a barbless hook, so I am somehow more ethical. Well, what it comes down to is you're still driving a piece of steel into a fish's face for fun.
I think there's more fly fishermen that eat fish than admit it. Yeah, there was some lingo in the films last night. He didn't quite understand.
Shut up, we'll get there. All right, folks, welcome to the Gritty Bowmen podcast. And we're at the Fly Fishing Show in Denver, Colorado. We are here with Western Waters Media. What else? Like Blue Halo? You're in the Blue Halo
like
booth.
We're working,
plethora of mixtures of people and companies and brands that you just can't even imagine.
There's just so many people that want these two here. So
Yeah. I mean, we're a couple of celebs here on our right, and I'm here with Chad at my good friend Chad, and we're going to get into some questions. I have some things that will probably be sacrilegious to discuss in the fly fishing world, like perhaps killing a fish and some other things. You guys went to Iceland.
Hey, first, Derek Olthius, Phil Tuttle.
Introductions are
they're overrated.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
We didn't need to know that.
We'll get
we've
there.
got our counterparts that aren't here, Spencer Higa and Court Boyce of Blue Halo.
So you guys, I was here watching your film last night. You guys have a film in the Fly Fishing Film Festival. Is that what it's called?
Yeah, IF4.
IF4.
Yeah.
It's a big deal. Like, this film festival kills it. It crushes it. If you're into fly fishing, you know about this festival for the most part. I mean, it was a packed house.
And tonight was the premiere for all the films, right?
Yeah.
And
so it's usually in Denver. They're talking about changing that, but the premiere happens in Denver at this show, at the Fly Fishing.
That's right. And your film was the first one of the night, and I'll just say it right now. I mean, you guys made an incredible film. You're super talented. I was really impressed. The neckbeard film was also on another level.
Dude,
like,
isn't that like
the neckbeard was hilarious?
It's so legit.
So entertaining.
So for folks wondering, there's a creature out there with a neckbeard that's human-like. This is a cool film. It was a fun film festival. I found myself frustrated at times as I'm watching this for a couple of things, okay? And this is where we're going to get into this fly fishing culture here that sort of clashes a little bit with the hunting culture in a sense that you don't catch and release an elk. You kill it or you don't.
Right.
But with fishing, you can actually catch it, photograph it, and let it go.
Right.
Yeah.
But why can't you people eat a freaking fish?
We do.
It's just a sturdy little secret that you don't tell everybody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Like I told Chad last night as we were watching the film festival, I go, you know what's surprising me? There's not a single dead fish in this festival. Like, none of them are killed.
That's sacrilegious.
And I'm like, do you think if you did a film where you actually killed a fish and ate it, that you could get into the film festival? And I don't know if you could.
It would have to be very specific. It would have to be like a brook trout or, something where people didn't just...
Like an invasive species.
Exactly. Like a brook trout somewhere where they're not native or,
Yeah.
There would have to be a reason. Like, it seems like there's been films that have been done. Yeah, it seems like there's been films that have been done like in the Amazon where they're like straight up, they eat the fish to live while they're filming the video.
Yeah.
But other than that, like if they're in Montana and they're catching a brown on a dry fly, like it's going back.
Well, that's right. There was a film last night. They're in the Amazon jungle and they're teaching this village to fish, how to catch these fish. And it's for the purpose of feeding the village.
Yeah.
But you didn't see any of that. It was just all...
It's surprisingly powerful the culture against keeping a fish.
It's
intense, dude.
It's unbelievable.
It's actually ridiculous.
Like, we're trying to educate people that isn't necessarily the answer all the time. I mean, there's kind of this thing that I think is pretty cool when someone, catches a fish that's, say, 25, 26 inches, like a big brown. It would be considered a trophy brown,
Yeah.
And someone catches it and they put it back. And then like a year later, like a 6-year-old kid catches that same fish, and you can tell because of the spotting is like a fingerprint, right? So they're like, oh my gosh, that's that same fish that, Brian caught 2 years ago. Like, holy cow, that's so sweet. And now it's like way bigger. It's 30 inches and, and that's cool. But, on the other hand, we have these systems from a biological standpoint. Sorry, I was a fisheries biologist for 5 years, so I get really geeky and nerdy.
That's something that people need to know, like that background for you.
Sure. So, like, on the other hand of that we have these systems, that just have just an incredible overpopulation problem where there are just so many fish that they're just eating themselves out of house and home. There's just competition like crazy, and those fish just do not reach the potential. They grow these little tiny bodies with big, huge heads, and that's it. There's only head on that fish, and they're all snaky and tiny.
Tell how old the fish is by that head size, really.
Sure.
I mean, it's older.
Well, right, exactly.
But the body just doesn't match the head.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you'll fish a system where literally, if you catch a fish over 12, 13 inches, like, you had a good day. Like, that was a big fish. But the system,
and that's not normal.
No, that's not. It all comes down to balance between the number of fish in the system and the amount of food. So like if there's too many fish, then they won't grow to their potential. They'll just be small and stunted. So, but we can try to educate people on, hey, like, people eat some fish, like, take some fish home. But there's this strange euphoria, this strange.
Oh, and like bait fishermen, the guy
like,
goes
no
out there
way.
with power bait and brings home a string of fish, and the fly fisherman's like, "You are scum."
Oh, totally.
There's that.
It's so
this
true.
Strong attitude.
Yeah, there's this elitist mentality, and
so tell folks that
we hate that.
How did you get into fish biology? And where did you work?
So I got a master's degree at Utah State.
Okay.
Fisheries emphasis, and I was working for the Division of Wildlife out of the northern region is kind of where I went. But that all began with this passion for research, and I just so geek out over research and data. And
you've always been into fishing, though.
I've always fished. I haven't fly fished for that long, to be honest. I've fly fished for less than 10 years now. But, I always fish.
What are you, like 20? So, I mean, gosh, that's like half your life.
I'm 33.
Okay.
But,
sorry.
But, I think the big thing for me is that, honestly, I like to hunt. And I've always hunted, from when I was a little kid.
Yeah.
Killed some nice animals.
We saw one last night.
We'll have to get into that. Mr. Modest here has shot the state record in Utah, bull elk.
He had to mount it basically on the floor because the rack was so tall.
Yeah, it makes the fire bull look, kind of like his little brother.
We're not going to talk about that now. But anyways, so I like this thing about hunting, and we kind of fish a different style of most people in that, we're really big into straight up like stalking a fish. Like you do the research just like with hunting. You research your areas just like with hunting. You go to some place because it has trophy potential.
Right.
It's all the same thing. And I do it on both sides of the spectrum. And Derek's the exact same way as me, and that's why we just relate. We have this chemistry, and we can, whatever. But we go to a place where we know there's going to be big fish. We beat our heads against the wall like we do when we hunt. We just kill ourselves, and then all of a sudden it comes together, and you're holding a fish that, 1/2 of 1% of humans in the world will ever hold. And that's what does it for us.
When you're talking about these fish, because I want to get into this discussion about why fishing and why it's so good and Iceland and these adventures you went on, because that whole discussion about, just the logistics of getting to Iceland, but then fishing some of the places you fished, this prehistoric trout, kind of thing you guys talking about in the film. Like, what do they call that, by the way? Like
Ice Age trout.
Ice Age trout.
Yeah.
Dude.
They look like it. They're a different color over
that's
there.
phenomenal. It's
wild.
That is just so we'll get there. But before we do, when you're talking about these fisheries, I have this thing that kind of I get frustrated when people, a non-hunter comes along or whatever, and they're like, you shouldn't be killing wolves, or why do you bear hunt? There's no point in it. Right. And for me, I look at the same with a deer or an elk. I look at the state manages that for its maximum potential.
Right.
Whether people like to call it this or not, it is a natural resource, a natural recurring resource, meaning you cut down a tree, one grows back, right?
Yeah, the key is sustainability.
Yes.
Right? I mean,
absolutely.
It's sustainable.
So if you can harvest a certain number of fish out of a fishery, which, by the way, it's a damn river. Why do we have to call it a fishery?
Sorry. I called it a system. But
a system? It's like, why do you guys got to go all elitist and geek out? Like,
sorry.
I was watching it last night, and guys like, we know about this permit fishery, and we want to go there, and da-da-da. And I go, and he talked about it like 3 times. I lean over to Chad, I'm like, why doesn't he just buy the frickin' permit and go fishing? And he's like, oh my gosh.
I'm like, Brian, a permit is a fish.
No idea. Right? So
dude.
some of this lingo I'm struggling
so
on.
He says, well, why don't they call it a permit fish? I'm like, Brian, they don't call it a rainbow fish, a brown trout fish. It's a permit.
Yeah. I still think if they
classic.
put fish on the end, it would be a little better. But anyway, and they're using some lingo like this.
So good.
Where they're permit fishery, and I'm like, I guess it's going to take some time to get used to it, but we're talking about where they're for maybe guys who don't know, like me, we're talking about a spot where let's call a fishery a system, a river where it's being managed for use. And populations are being tested. People are getting in there, and they're
electrofishing. They're seeing how many fish are per mile.
There are, and then they're saying, okay, this is what kind of harvest this river can sustain and still be super healthy.
Right.
Be sustainable, recurring. And same thing with tag allotments in different states. Right. They're managing these populations. If they get wiped out from, let's say, like Prince of Wales Island, there's just a storm that comes and everything freezes and dies that year, and your population of blacktails drops, so there's 15% left.
Right.
So the next year there's no tags, right? Or the next 3 years. But then there's an abundance where it's been warm for 5 years in a row, and there's more blacktails than you can shake a stick at, and they're like, yeah, you can shoot 4 this year.
Right.
There's a few guys that are starting to get it and talk about it. And I've read a couple articles recently where the guys are saying, look, fly fishermen, and these are fly fishing articles, they says they're doing too good of a job of catch and release.
Right.
And we applaud you, years ago for doing that. But look, to your point, the fish are only growing 12 inches, 13 inches, have these big heads, and we need anglers to keep more fish.
We do.
The Provo River,
totally
Chad,
do.
is like the biggest example of that. The Provo River for years was overfished and had troubles, and then they did some restoration projects, and it started producing trophy fish. Well, then they went through and they literally engineered the entire river for reproduction. They put in gravel. They put in sections where the fish could grow larger and hide from the bigger predatory fish. And they did all this work. And now, today, the numbers have skyrocketed. And when the Fish and Game has come in and said, hey, let's have anglers harvest some of these fish, the fly fishing community just absolutely flipped, No, we cannot kill fish.
Yeah.
Well, as a guide on the river, I see that the numbers have gone skyrocketing up, but the size has dwindled. I mean, we're talking where you used to catch 20-inch fish pretty frequently. That's just not the case. You know, in a season as a guide on the river, I see a handful of fish in that size. The majority of fish are 8 to 12 inches long, and
Well, yeah, I mean that's an important point to make. Is that from a management standpoint, back to like your main point, like the state is like trying to tell people to keep fish. Like they're making more liberal bag limits. They're saying, please keep some fish here. But the problem comes back to this community where people are, like you're saying, just don't want to kill a fish. And I applaud that. I mean, so they're trying to, from a management standpoint, they're trying to manage these populations.
The people that understand what's going on.
But the people just won't.
I think that when, we tend to have a knee-jerk reaction or a strong, so we almost lose all these fisheries, right?
Sure.
We almost lose. In fact, some of them we lose completely, and we had to stock and bring in fish from other areas to try to build them back up again. We build these rivers back, so we have this resource that we almost wiped out. And here they are coming back, and it's almost hard for someone who's spent 20, 30 years, back in a time where there were no trout left, to now go, okay, now there's so many, we need to take them out. It's like this shift that is slow to take place because you've worked so hard at protecting these populations, and now it's like you're saying I can just harvest them. It's a tough thing.
Right. Yep.
But I go back to the whole thing about the biologists. Let them do their jobs.
Sure.
That's what they're there for. That they know more than I do, right? About those rivers.
Yep.
What they can sustain, what's best for them. I of course, a state could exploit their resources, right? Just to make money. Hey, we're going to, you can take whatever you want. And we've seen it before in places where an entire, big game population just tanks because they just give tags away like free tickets.
Right.
And it's a short-term gain. The state makes a lot of money for a while until they wipe out that resource and it's not sustainable. And then now they have to spend years trying to build it back. But it's just not that just doesn't happen that much anymore. It seems like, across the nation, most states understand the value of their wildlife and they work very hard. And there's a lot of conservation organizations out there working with them to keep it sustainable.
Right.
Most biologists have the knowledge to determine how much can be harvested and still maintain those healthy populations.
Where are those thresholds?
And it drives me crazy when someone comes along who's not the biologist and does their own management practices. So it's like...
Well, fly fishing, honestly, has a lot of almost like shaming techniques where people have these made-up ethics of... like, oh, I use a barbless hook, so I'm somehow more ethical. Well, what it comes down to is you're still driving a piece of steel into a fish's face for fun. You're no better than me. But the point that I think every angler, every hunter, every outdoorsman has to really ask is this good for the environment? Is this a sustainable practice? What's best here for this river or this piece of land? As a steward, can I kill 10 fish and is it okay for the system? If I'm fishing for, maybe a bull trout in a certain region, the answer is no, you can't take a fish out. But if I'm fishing for a brown trout on the Provo River or a brook trout in a high mountain lake that is overpopulated, you bet the best question or the best answer to that question is yes, I can kill 10 fish and it's going to help that fishery.
I think one challenge that we kind of face with this problem is that, let's compare brown trout flesh to, say, elk flesh. You know what I mean? Like, there are not that many people that like to eat trout. I mean, there's some. There's plenty, if you will, but there are a lot of people that just straight up don't. But they like to fish. They like to feel a fish on the end of on the other end of a rod. So, those people are like, well, crap. I want to help, but what? I'm gonna kill these fish and then take them home and
not eat
waste them,
Right.
like then
Right.
what? You know, so I think it, you know, going back to Derek's like steward, you know, comment, like we all could make a difference. We all know people that like fish. Like you can donate. You know, I mean, there's
Not just
ways
that.
around that.
Not just
you
that,
know?
like, you know, Meat Eater's done a phenomenal job of connecting the act of hunting to it as a food source.
Right.
I know a lot of people 10 years ago, 15 years ago, they're like, yeah, I hunt. I love to hunt. I don't eat any of it. I donate it. I drop it off at the local. Dude, I want beef, right? It's too tough. It doesn't taste good. It's gamey.
Right.
You hear all these stories, right?
Yep.
Well, pretty much, 90% of that's just a myth.
It's so true. Yeah, it's so true.
And that education has taken place, and there's a lot of people who now desire these meats that in the past were like, yeah, I'm not going to eat that.
Right.
And that connection, I think, is really important when it comes to fish. I mean, we were at Traeger Grills, and it was a
very cool
visit. And we had pitmaster, cooking extraordinaire Chad Ward talk about cooking fish and fish recipes and how do you prepare fish, how do you smoke them and stuff like that. And it's like same thing with game meat. There's so much delicious potential out of that food source.
Oh yeah.
Like when you say people don't like trout, it's like my wife is like, I don't like deer. Really? When did you have it? Oh, this one time, and it was like shoe leather, and it was a steak, and it was nasty. And I'm like, okay. And then, I introduce her to elk burgers and, chili and all this kind of stuff. And she's like, it's her bite. I mean, she eats it every day.
Yeah. And that's us too. We literally live off of elk meat and fish flesh. I mean, it's what we eat.
I think educating people on how to prepare it so that it's phenomenal.
Yeah.
I think there's more
part of that.
I think there's more fly fishermen that eat fish than admit it.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah. I've only been in this fly fishing community for a couple of years now, but I have yet to meet one guy in having a personal one-on-one conversation with him that has told me, I'm only catch and release. I don't eat fish. Everyone I've talked to has said, yeah, I'll eat one once in a while. But for some reason, a lot of them put up this front or want this image that they're catch and release only, and they don't want to admit it in public that they eat fish.
Well,
and I don't get
let's just say it publicly right now. That's silly.
Yeah.
From my perspective,
no, we agree. I mean, we're,
So I wanted to ask you guys a question, kind of a controversial topic, and that is around fishing during the spawn, fishing over the reds.
I heard that's a great way to catch some fish, some big ones.
It is.
I went out with Flycraft and Chad, and they were showing me them and this and that, and they're like, so we really want to fish around this and this, and I'm like, but you just said they're big fish over here. And he's like, yeah, but they're spawning, and I'm like, yeah, but they're big fish over there. So what's the story on that?
I mean, really, it has to come down to kind of what we've been talking about to this point, which is understanding population, what the river can harvest, what you can legally take out. But again, I understand to a lot of guys, this is an ethical and moral decision, and some of them don't want to fish it, and others are like, heck yeah, man, that's when I catch my biggest fish.
I think really it's funny because this is probably the most controversial topic in fly fishing.
Really?
And it's super taboo. It's kind of like you said with people don't want to admit that they eat fish publicly. People don't want to admit that they fish the spawn, even though they do. And the question, once again, for me, comes back to like everyone's going to have their own moral thought on the subject. Like, oh, I don't fish it because it's too easy to catch fish or because I want to leave them alone to reproduce. But for me, it really comes down to, is this good for the fishery? If I'm going to fish for something like a lake trout that is an invasive species that comes into spawn and they outcompete something else, I feel no guilt whatsoever to fish for that fish.
Yeah.
Right.
But if I fish for, say, where I grew up in Montana around the Flathead Lake, if I fish for a bull trout that's spawning, that's already being out-competed by a lake trout, that's an invasive species, and here's this bull trout that is having a hard time making it, and it doesn't successfully spawn very well compared to a lake trout, I'm just going to leave it alone. I'm going to let it do its thing, and I'm going to give it every chance to reproduce and be successful as I can. But, so I think if people would realize that it's not necessarily a bad thing to fish to spawning fish when it's done with a little bit of thought, then it's not that big of a deal. But people want to make it this huge thing like, I don't fish to spawn. Like, what are you talking about? Of course you fish for spawning fish, like every fish that enters the fresh water in Alaska coming up to spawn, whether it's in the act, whether it's in the act of spawning or not,
it's on its way to spawn.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and not only that, but like a lot of people's argument is like there's sort of this, we're taking advantage of this vulnerability, right? But I mean,
doesn't every hunter do that?
Well, that's they do, like but the elk rut.
Well, right, but and the other thing too is like
I need them during their stupidity phase.
So
can't kill them otherwise.
The same fly angler like a week ago, I mean, just an example, was fishing to those same fish. A hatch happened. Let's say something came off, and all of a sudden, all those fish that were literally hiding in the river are all up. They're all on the surface. You can see them. They're all vulnerable. They're all. What's the difference?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? So if your argument is vulnerability, you don't have an argument, in my opinion.
Yeah.
It's
interesting.
Yeah. But if your argument is, hey, I don't feel good fishing to that fish because it's reproducing and this fish isn't doing very well. It's native. It's, conservation standpoint, that is great. And I will stand by you and I can stand with that argument, but
sure.
It is very situational.
Yeah.
It just depends on what.
So with Ranella, him and Ryan Callahan had a show when they were at, I think, the fly fishing show up there in Montana or some kind of fly fishing get together. And big show. And it was an interesting podcast. People should go listen to it. It's pretty funny because Ranella talks about poking holes in fish's faces and dragging them to the surface and how cruel and weird that is. Like, who does that? Like, if you're not going to kill it and eat it. Like, it's kind of a bizarre and twisted activity. But he's like, in fact, I don't think this could be invented twice. The stupidity of like catch and release. Like if we redid evolution back 200 years, like this wouldn't happen. It's a weird twist of humanity. But seriously, talked about catching fish and releasing them. And he had Giannis on there, who was a guide in, I think, Colorado or Montana or something. But he's a guide for a long time, and he's taking guys out on rivers, and he's fishing with them. And they're catching all these fish and letting them go. And Ranella's brother is a fish biologist. And they actually talked about, okay, if a guy catches an elitist kind of fly fisherman comes along and he's like, I don't kill fish, Phil. I don't. I am better than you. And he goes and he catches all these fish, maybe 20 of them.
Sure. Hashtag fish are not food.
Or like 40 of them.
That's a real hashtag.
So I think he was saying it's not uncommon to catch like 40 really nice fish or more. Can't remember what the number. It was a lot of fish in one day. Yeah. Because you're drifting the river and you're just catching them and you're letting them go. And they were asking the biologist, what's the survival rate for those catches? And it was actually, they were talking like a survival rate of only 60%, maybe 70%. So if a guy catches, say
catches 100.
Say catches 100 between them, you've killed 30 fish. Well, let's say your harvest, you're allowed to take home 4 fish a day.
Yeah.
You're talking about a completely different situation here where a guy that goes and actually takes 4 fish a day is impacting less than the so-called guy who doesn't kill fish.
Totally.
And I think that's a blind, approach, a denial of your true impact on that environment. We were talking about this the other day with you, Phil, when a guy catches a fish, it's people don't realize how fragile a fish can be. I was watching the other day a guy fishing in the ocean, and he pulls up the rockfish, I think it was. It has no swim bladder or something like that. Anyway, the fish comes up.
It's swim bladder expanded.
Okay.
I guarantee you that's what
So that's
went down. Yep.
there's this giant bubble out of its body, and I'm like, that looked freaking painful. So he's at such a depth
Yeah.
that basically it's not unlike a diver who goes down and gets the bends.
Story. Yep.
Yep.
Right?
Exactly.
Like comes back up, and by catching the fish at all, you've killed it.
Yeah.
Right.
I think some people don't realize how traumatic it is to catch for a fish to be caught. So can you describe that a little bit to this non-fisher?
I know exactly
fisherman?
how it feels. It hurts really bad.
Come on.
I sometimes
what aids in his survival?
In Phil's
Okay.
food
No, sure, that's good. So I mean, I think what you're getting at is there are certain things that conditions, if you will, that will help or make it way worse. There are certain fisheries that we don't like to fish, for example, in the summer months that have really big trout. One of those is tiger muskie. You catch a tiger muskie in July, and you entice that fish up out of cooler water, up into that top, 7-8 feet of water, and you catch that fish, hook that fish, if you will, and it fights hard. It pulls, it exhausts itself. And then what happens is you're up there with that fish, it's in the water. You're keeping it in the water. Mm-hmm. There's no oxygen in that water right there. It's so hot. You overstress that fish, and that fish croaks. It's like no matter what you try to do to revive that fish, it dies. So, I mean,
it just might die the next day.
Well, or
it could
that
die
day,
in an hour.
It could die right. It could even swim away.
Looks normal, but
it's toast.
It's exhausted.
So I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things is like water temps. So if it's super hot, you're definitely killing more fish. You think you're being good at catch and releasing, you're killing fish. And it just
what's
totally
the story on getting your hands wet and touching it and all that and.
There's some validity there. Like if you want to be releasing fish, they've got a layer, a slime layer on the outside of them that, if you wet your hands first, it doesn't pull as much of that slime layer off. There's been research done with lots of things, even like gloves. Like a lot of guys will use like kind of a mesh glove to, tail a fish and pick it up. And they've done research to show, you release that fish after you use that glove, it pulled the slime off. And then watch what happens, as they, they'll release that fish into a tank and then just, progression like over the months. And you see infection happen there on that where they were holding the fish on the tail. And,
And they've made a progression in nets too, right? That kind of help.
Yeah, I've noticed like the nets aren't like they were when I was a kid.
You can talk about all these things that will help in catch and release, but, fish are pretty dang strong too. Just an example of fish resiliency. Yeah. Like we were doing this effort with Trout Unlimited on the Weber River, where we were tagging cutthroat trout. So we would catch a fish, we would insert what's called a pit tag, which is like a little tiny, it's not electronic, but it does have a wire encoded with a unique number. So that you can run an electronic scanner over the fish and it will pick up that number and say, oh, that's fish number, right?
Yeah.
So then we actually lay these antennas in these tributaries to the Weber, and when fish swim over the antenna, then it picks up that tag. So we know, oh, this fish...
You're counting them like electronically.
Exactly. Okay. Yep. So we know that, oh, this fish spawns in this tributary or whatever, it's some pretty neat stuff. And then you see movement too, like, when the fish goes and oh, it moved like, holy cow, it moved like 20 miles upriver this year. Like, why did it,
So these are mature fish that you caught and tagged.
Right, exactly. So we were there on the Weber doing this effort, and we were in a section of the Weber where it is actually catch and release, like the requirement that, you have to release cutthroat because the cutthroat aren't doing very well.
Yeah.
Right there, we're trying to study this population. Catch and release only for cutthroat. You can keep everything else. You can keep browns, whatever. But
right.
And so we're there tagging fish, and, I just happened to stumble up on this angler who's, sitting there fishing, and he's got a bag of fish, sweet. He's going to keep some fish. And as I'm walking past the bag, I see this like head sticking out of the bag, and I can tell it's a cutthroat. I can see its head, and I'm like, oh dang, bummer. Here I am, DWR. Walking up on this guy. He's got a cutthroat that appears to be dead. I mean, it is like gills, like like fish is not.
It ain't moving.
It's not looking good.
Right.
And I asked the guy, are you familiar with the regulations? And he's like, yeah, I got a rainbow here, and I was like, that's actually a cutthroat, and he was like, oh no, serious? Like he knew the reg. He genuinely felt bad, he didn't. Yeah. He just struggled with ID between cutthroat and rainbow,
Yeah.
Dude, I do that. I can see that pretty simple. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Okay, whatever.
Yeah. So this guy is like, do you think I could like revive the fish? And I'm like, I don't know. Try, sure.
Frozen dead in the winter.
Did he say how long he'd had it out?
He didn't say. He said, yeah. I said, how long has the fish been out of water? He said at least 20 minutes. So it's cold outside. This was like in the middle of the winter.
It was
like
February
now.
or something.
Okay.
Yeah. So it had been cold, but no kidding. Like the fish is in a grocery bag, and the fish is not gilling. It's not like moving its jaw, anything.
Yeah.
And he pulls the fish out of the bag, and it is just limp as a noodle. Puts it in the water. And so we kept tagging around him. We were like catching fish and tagging. And 20 minutes, this guy's sitting there reviving this fish. And, most people would be like, even if that fish swims, he's going to say it swam away.
Yeah. It's gonna float down the river.
He's going to put a rock on it, whatever, to, avoid a ticket. But the crazy thing is I walked over there, like probably a half an hour later, and the guy had the fish in the water. And the fish, I could tell the fish was like ready to go. That fish was hot and swimming and strong.
Wow.
And I was like, holy smokes, are you serious? And so then then I have this idea. I'm like, holy cow, like, should we tag this fish? I mean, it's already gone through.
Just tag it. Dude, of course, it's like the ultimate question.
Right? So we did. We tagged the fish. I'm like, I hope that could have been like the threshold. We're going to stick a needle in this fish now after it just went through that. But we did.
And we're going to send you a ticket later if he's dead.
So then, we tag the fish. I write down the pit tag number on the data sheet, and we name the fish right then, the garbage bag fish, so
the garbage bag fish. Why not like the Terminator or something cool? I'll be back.
Well, at that, but that's the thing is at that point you're thinking that fish is toast.
Oh, okay.
Do you know what I mean? Like I'm just like the garbage bag fish.
I'm just more optimistic than you. I'd have come up with a name that's like Survivor.
Sorry.
Okay,
I failed on the name.
We'll let it slide.
So it was the garbage bag fish.
Change the story for next time.
Okay.
Lie.
So the garbage bag fish now is in the database. Okay, so here we are. Actually, just that same year, it would have been that spring. So this was like now January, February, and come April, May of that year, we've got these flat plate antennas in the tribs, and we're like always kind of like watching, like, holy cow, is this fish still alive? Did it hit the antenna? And all of a sudden, sure enough, we get a hit on that one of these antennas from the garbage bag fish, and we're like, holy smokes, like. It lived,
joke.
And here's the big kicker.
He swims like this. He's alive.
The next year, the garbage bag fish hit the antennas again.
Wow.
So that fish didn't only survive, it spawned that year.
Yeah.
It left the trib, came back to the main river. The very next year, it swam up the trib again and spawned again.
And now
that fish was dead in a bag. I mean,
that is crazy.
And they don't. And now,
so we can argue resilience.
And he was educated, so he doesn't bite hooks anymore.
He's like, that was a bad experience. One I do not care to replicate.
I died. Some guy stuck a needle in me.
I see the light. I see the light.
So I'm pretty big on let's go to like photographs. There are guys that you pull a fish out of the water and they're like, lose their minds over it.
Keep them wet.
Keep them wet.
Yep.
Yeah.
So there's this big movement, like keep them wet. Like, don't you dare pull that steelhead out of the water even to take a photo. And as a biologist, like handling fish and seeing,
their resilience.
be smart, but holy cow! Like pick up that fish if you want to snap a quick photo. Like that is just ridiculous.
So have we beat this dead horse, or should we keep going?
Well, I think one last point before, and maybe this is just one last kick to that dead horse, but I think what it comes down to is during certain times of the year, those fish are going to be vulnerable to die, from heat exhaustion or something, where a trout likes a certain temperature of water. And when it's 80-degree water, that trout is on the edge of dying, and you catching it is going to kill it. Yeah. Versus in the winter or during cooler months, it's all right. But what a lot of people don't realize is when they overexhaust a fish by fighting it. A common question is when you catch a big fish, guys will be like, "Oh, dude, how long that take you reel in? 20 minutes, bro?" Like,
yeah.
Are you kidding me? I had that in the net in freaking 15 seconds, or I had it in the net in like under a minute, because I freaking put the wood to him, like I hammered him. And the thing is, guys will use like this mentality of smaller is better in fly fishing. Oh, I used a size 20 dry fly with 7X, which is very really fine, like line. Really small line, and, which means they played the fish for 15 minutes to get it in the net. Well, what they don't realize is playing the fish for that long kills it more than quickly getting in the net, holding it out of the water for a second or two, getting a quick shot, giving it a breath. If you need to get another shot, give it 20, 30 seconds to get its breath back in the water, pick it up, take another photo, let the fish go, but don't play your fish for 45 minutes and expect that thing is going to, be okay. If someone tied you to the back of a car and made you run at top speed for 45 minutes, you're going to be pretty tired.
I mean, I can do it, but
some road rash.
Seriously. My cardio is not exactly that good, but
one thing I learned the hard way though, Derek. So Jason, I picked up fly fishing with him, fishing streamers, and we use 0X, 1X, 20-pound tippet in some cases, so we can get fish in quick.
Yeah,
but they have a lot of fight when you get them in that quick.
Yep, they do.
And they're harder to handle.
Removing a triple hook streamer can be dangerous when a fish has a lot of fight left in it. You might get one in the finger.
You sound like you've done that a couple times.
Maybe
I think we all have.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
When you get them in that quick and you see how much fight they have, that's a good thing. Yeah, it might be harder to get the picture, but you can do it.
You can do it. If you hold them properly, at the back of their tail is called the caudal peduncle. If you wrap your hands around
Wait a minute.
You made that up.
Okay.
You made that up.
Dude, I would have bought it hook, line, and sinker, too. I just had to, okay. What do you call it?
The caudal peduncle.
The caudal peduncle.
Yeah.
I'm going to use
real,
that from now on, dude.
That's real.
Hold it by the caudal peduncle every time.
Okay. So, but there is a way to hold it. Like, I heard the guy talking about, I was going to pull in the fish and stuff, but this guy had never tailed a fish before, so I was going to let him do it, and watching him do it was really tough to watch, and I'm like, this is so weird. Like, the whole, the tailing a fish and letting someone else have the honors and stuff. It's
so. I mean, with that, just like some context for you.
Okay,
we'll get
Help me out here.
Get you up to speed here. A permit is probably, it's like the holy grail for most, not most, but for a ton of fly fishermen. A permit is the holy grail. There's guys that will fish. I mean, I've heard of guys fishing 50 days in a row for a permit and, not landing one, like getting a few shots, maybe hooking a couple. So that was the big deal. The big deal was he was standing next to a 16-year-old kid
Yeah.
And he was going to actually let that kid have the shot, just literally landing that fish when
So
if
that fish
thing-
is kind of like
if
a
that-
unicorn.
Exactly. So if
Oh,
that
yeah.
fish gets off the hook, when that guy reaches and like bumps the line and pops the hook out, like
Right.
that's what was like everyone in that room that had fished for permit or knew the context of permit was like, oh my gosh, like that is going to pop off any second. And then like gone for out of his
Yeah.
life forever, So that was the big thing. Like permit, they have eyeballs like huge. I don't know if you noticed
We
that
saw
when they
that.
picked it up. Its eyes are so big. They are literally like this big. And you're throwing a fly that's made out of like foam and feathers, right? Or whatever, artificial materials. You're throwing a fly and that looks like a crab.
Yeah.
And you throw it a permit, and a permit is like drops down on the bottom, like puts it, like looks
Yeah.
at that fly, is like, I'm not going to eat that.
That's not real.
That's
not real.
ridiculous.
That's
Like,
stupid.
that's not even close, guys.
You're
and
an
that's
idiot.
and that's what they do. Literally, like you throw it a permit, you're like, here we go, I got him, and permit swims over, tips down, tail goes up, you'll see the tail pop up
Yeah.
out of the water, and a lot of guys are like, oh yeah, and they'll like set, no permit will move over, still just freaking looking at that fly, and it's not going to eat it. So that's
Wow.
the context.
All right, fine. I'll let it slide. It's a new world, man.
Dude, I'm grateful to have you two on today to help me educate Brian, because I can't tell you the discussions we had last night after the film festival.
He was just
We
blown
were up
away.
till 1 a.m.
It was an amazing. I know it's super neat. Those tarpon being 100-pound fish,
Yeah.
and not just big fish. Like I've caught my share of sturgeon
Yeah.
that are
Huge.
bigger,
Yeah.
Yeah.
but they don't fight like that.
They
It's
don't
like
jump
it's
6
like
feet in the air,
it's kinda like-
backflipping.
reeling in a log, and you
Sure.
got like a wire line. I don't know what they were using,
Sure.
being on a fly, but that's
Fly line, yeah.
yeah, that crazy. And then the amount of failures
Yeah.
getting it into that boat. But those tarpon look like prehistoric.
Oh,
They look like
awesome.
some
they're
kind of
so
dinosaur
cool.
age
Yeah,
type of
so
critter.
cool.
It's kind of like a
cool fish.
yeah.
Have you two ever been down there, bonefish, tarpon?
I've caught
permit?
bonefish. Yep, I haven't. I have never had a shot at a permit. I haven't caught.
I
tarpon.
fished for him this past spring, and I'm pretty sure I tasted that failure just like those guys. I mean, the first big one that I saw was with the guide on the front of his boat, and he's going through all the things, because with a tarpon, they're so big and so powerful when they jump. If you don't lean forward and give them a little slack line, it's called bowing, then they'll just snap your line.
So they come up in the air, and there's just gravity happens, and that fish pops, and right when that pops, it just either breaks your line or just
Bends
pulls
the hook
fly
or-
out. Yeah.
So the guides like, make sure you bow, in fly fishing, bow to the Silver King.
Yeah.
So I'm like going through it in my head, I got this, I can fly fish. We see this tarpon roll, I make a great cast like 50 feet right in front of it, one strip, boom, I'm tight. And this thing goes about 5 feet and then just blows out of the
Explodes.
water. And dude, just deer in the headlight moment, I just freeze, pinch my line, freeze, and just breaks me off. And the guy is yelling, bow, bow. And I'm sitting there, dude, not hearing a thing, just, oh, that was freaking awesome, And the guy's like, are you retarded? Like, what's wrong with you, dude? Like, you didn't listen to a word I say. You're terrible at fishing. Like, come on,
I never treat other people that
Dude,
way.
it sounds so much like
Yeah.
Brian.
Dude, he didn't even say any of it, but the look in his eyes, and he's pats me on the shoulder like I'm a little kid, and he's like, okay, buddy, next time, let's bow to the fish. I'm like, okay, I'm like, but dude, did you see that? That thing just blew 6 feet out of the water. And he's like, yeah, like I'm a guide. Like,
Yeah.
I get it. He's like, bow to the Silver King, dude. I'm like, okay, yeah. I was like, and like 15 fish later, the guide's still going, oh my heck, this guy is just not getting it.
Our bear hunt in Alaska 2 years ago.
Uh-huh.
First few days were frustrating hunting with Brian because he kept wanting me to use my 10x42 Vortex binoculars. Like, Brian, I can only see 10 feet into the forest. This is a freaking jungle. Why do I need binoculars? And he'll look over at me and he'll go like, binos. I'm like, I can see just fine. Binos aren't going to do anything.
Yeah, he's a rookie. So if you hunted like the Northwest, like I have, or Prince of Wales as much as I have, it's amazing. Like a lot of people just use their naked eye to look through brush because they can only see 50 yards max.
Right.
But you can't really see.
You see that ear flick. You see that with the binos.
And if you're spot and stock like we are with a bow in that kind of jungle thick, it's absolutely critical that you see the animal before it sees you.
Right.
If you don't see it first, game over. When you're with someone new, I've watched guys hunt in that place. And it's like,
I'm almost over it.
Like
2 years
you'll,
later.
you'll watch them like marching along, and they think they're really sneaky. And I'm like, whoa, dude, you just woke up the entire forest. Like, there's no way you're sneaking up on anything. And they think they're being so sneaky. It's like, nope, it's
not sneaky.
You're
fishing
you're way
is
over
the
that.
Same way.
It was literally ninja style.
You get it, because in fly fishing, it's the same way. Like Phil and I love to sight a fish and sight fish it. Like there it is. But most people never get that opportunity because fish have a lateral line on them that picks up, movement, vibration. And guys are just like, boom, 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 just stomping down the bank. Just like you're saying, they woke up the whole river and they're like, dude, I've fished here my whole life. I've never caught a fish that big. Well, because every time you walk up and down the bank, a fish 200 yards up from you felt that. Yeah. And he's like, the heck is that thing come? Like, I'm going over to my log and hiding.
Bank,
It was interesting as I watched the film festival last night, including you guys, how often you guys are hiding behind a rock bluff about 20 yards from the bank. And you're like chucking it over where the fish can't see you. Yeah. The cameraman's over there filming the fish in the water, and you can see the fly land, and you can see the fish come up. Well, that fish didn't know you were there.
Right.
And most guys walk right up to the bank, wade into their knees, and then try to catch that fish.
Yeah, totally. A lot of guys, one fun thing too is it's funny watching guys that, and I was that guy too. I'm not saying this is like, I'm not making fun of this guy.
I am still that guy.
But like going to a river or, wherever we fish and seeing fish, you just get this trained eye to be able to see fish and watch these newer guys, like just, they cannot see fish. It's kind of like, with hunting, same thing. You're like, oh, there's a deer, and it's like 400 yards away, and you picked it out with your naked eye, and someone is just like, whatever, where,
you get accustomed to the game eye, and you're like, there's deer, there's an elk, there's that.
Exactly.
And you're with somebody who's like, where? It's like staring right at you.
Yep.
But it takes time to.
It does. Yeah. Same thing with fish. Fish in the water is you get a trained eye for the shape, the color, whatever it is. But people that are noobs just don't see it. And it just adds so much more fun to fishing when you learn that, because then at least for me, I'm totally speaking for myself, but I love fishing too because I like to hunt and stalk fish, So when I can go hunt and find a big fish and literally put a stalk on that fish and, make a presentation that he doesn't know, it's awesome.
One thing Chad mentioned not too long ago, he's like, as I got into fly fishing, I realized that it's more like hunting than I thought, and that I'm stalking and hunting a fish. Only the difference is, rather than me ambushing it and actually putting an arrow or whatever into it, he's like, I have to entice it to take that final step, and that is another challenge in itself.
Yeah, that's exactly what Derek said on a previous podcast.
Yeah. That's a cool idea.
It is so fun. And dude, I can't even tell you how many times I have seen a fish up on a bluff, or I'm looking down off of a bluff, and I go and get into position, and I literally crawl on my hands and knees. I'm sure there's other anglers walking by on the other side of the river that are going, what is that moron doing, you know? And I'm just out there like, dude, I sometimes fish in a full ghillie suit and it's like literally crawling around.
He's not kidding.
I'm not kidding.
He is not kidding. This guy owns a ghillie suit and he fishes in
That's
in
badass.
my car.
I'm not going to lie.
It's in my car at all times. And I have sat in
You guys
bushes.
watching the bank and there's just this bush that's casting a fly. Like,
Oh, but that's just sometimes what it takes, you know, like sitting in a bush and watching a fish for a half an hour to figure out its feeding behavior before you even introduce a fly to it. And dude, it's so
that's
fun.
super cool. Never even thought about that. I like the idea. I just love watching the animals, right? Seeing the behavior. And most of the time, I'm not thinking about sight fishing at all. Like, it doesn't occur to me as even an option.
Derek, you mentioned on previous podcast, you'd sat literally for 4 hours at one point just targeting one fish. And I was explaining this to Brian, and he couldn't quite wrap his head around the fact that somebody would sit there for 4 hours straight.
It was a unicorn fish.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, so you just think of it as a 200-inch buck. Could you watch a 200-inch buck for
hours, all day, weeks?
Me too, right? So it's the same thing for this guy right here. You know, this guy's 200-inch buck is that 30-inch buck, you know, brown trout or whatever, you know. So it's the same thing. Like he could sit there and watch that fish all day. So,
you know, I'm not big into hunting just because I've never had the opportunity, but it appeals to me so much. But I heard the story of the graveyard buck in Utah. I don't know if anyone's ever heard of that guy, but
Devin Leonard.
So this buck lived in a graveyard, and you know you can't hunt there. But he was obsessed with this thing.
I had a buddy send me pictures of that buck.
Cool buck, you know.
Yeah.
And the whole point was he just sat there and watched this thing until it made a wrong move. It left, went on to a spot where he could shoot it, and he downed it. And the same thing, like that brown trout that we're talking about for me was in a public pond, and a lot of guys, you know, had like, oh, it's in this public pond, look down on it. Well, dude, that fish was the most educated fish I've ever seen.
Well, think about it. Think about how many, like, hundreds of people had like fished there daily, you know?
And
that's the ultimate test.
For me, like, I spent probably 90 days total watching that fish, learning its behaviors, and whether someone, like, whatever, you know, they can think it's not a cool fish to them, but to me, it's one of the coolest fish I've ever caught because I put so much effort into it, including, like, you know,
your ghillie suit.
Yeah, like Chad said, dude, you know, 4 hours. I did that a lot, embarrassingly, sitting in the rain, you know, just hunkered behind a rock, like waiting for this thing to
You are a cut above. I want to get into this Iceland thing. We watched your film last night. It was amazing, and you know, we have some things we want to talk about as far as that the logistics of that adventure. You basically want to go because we want to catch 30-inch fish without having any talent.
Because it's just so easy to do over there.
Yeah, it's cake.
Yeah.
You just show up.
Yeah. Well, I mean, totally. You guys had a guide and everything, so it doesn't really count. It's not DIY. And
let's talk about that.
Yeah,
for sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, dude, let's talk Iceland next.
Sweet.
Perfect.
Sounds all right. Stay gritty.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Friends, hunters, outdoorsmen, lend me your ears. Please take this moment to listen to this excerpt from the Gritty Bowmen film, Back to Traditions. Despite our ever-changing, ever-indignant world with its growing ignorance of and indifference to the ways of the wild, I remain a predator, pitying those who revel in artificiality and synthetic success while regarding me and my kind as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood. I stalk a real world of dark wood and tall grass stirred by a restless wind blowing across sunlit water and beneath star-strewn sky. And on those occasions when I choose to kill, to claim some small part of nature's bounty for my own, I do so by choice, quickly, with the learned efficiency of a skilled hunter. Further, in my heart and mind, I know the truth and make no apologies for my actions or my place in time. Others around me may opt to eat only plants, nuts, and fruits. Still others may employ faceless strangers to procure their meats, their leather, their feathers, and all those niceties and necessities of life. Such is their right, of course, and I wish them well. All I ask in return is no one begrudge me, and all of us who may answer the primordial stirrings within our hunters' souls, my right to do some of these things myself. What you just heard is a quote from M.R. James. We truly live in a world that is largely ignorant and indifferent to the ways of the wild. And although some regard us as relics of a time and place no longer valued or understood, we have the opportunity to change the way these people view the hunter and the hunt. We can share our experiences and nature's bounty with those who employ these faceless strangers. And by so doing, we make a difference, not just for ourselves, but for the wild animals in the wild places we care so deeply about. Never stop sharing your passion for hunting and the outdoors. Our wild animals and our wild places depend on it. We want to thank Kifaru, Mountain Ops, Hoyt, Vortex, Phelps, Black Eagle Arrows, and Crispy Boots for supporting the Gritty Bowmen. We love these companies and the people behind them. They truly make fantastic products. Please support them whenever you can. And as always, good luck on your hunts and stay gritty.
This is Ty Stubblefield, and you're listening to the Gritty Bowmen.
Gritty Bowmen.